I've already talked about what some of the issues with modern video games are, but for this video I want to focus on what retro video games do well by comparison. Now, of course there will be some shots taken at modern games just by default, but that doesn't seem to bother anybody watching this channel, so here we go. Also, this isn't to say that there's nothing good about modern games. For some people, they provide a lot of entertainment. I'm not taking anything away from that. I even play modern games myself. This is just a list of reasons why some retro gamers prefer retro games over modern games. And when I refer to modern games, in this context, I'm talking about the big budget AAA games and not so much indie games, which I kind of considered their own category, and especially because they're very influenced by retro games and try to be like them in a lot of ways. One of the biggest things has gotta just be the immediacy of all of it. With most retro games, it's a cartridge, you pop that cartridge in, there's no giant update waiting for you, the game is ready to go. You're playing the game within seconds, and then once you're playing the game, you're doing just that. You're playing the actual game. You're not waiting through long tutorials or giant cutscenes or any of that. No. Right into that gameplay. Now, don't get me wrong, the story and narratives in games can be great, it can be amazing, but if that's what you're looking for, some retro gamers aren't looking for that, no matter how great it is. And so, for retro games, there's a very obvious advantage there because retro games overall clearly prioritize gameplay over story and narrative and all those other elements. Now, this isn't to say that story and narrative are completely absent from retro games, of course not, but the story in most retro games is kind of just there to provide some context for what you're doing. And for the retro games that are more story driven, for example JRPGs, very story driven games, you still feel like there's a lot of gameplay in those games. And when it comes to gameplay, what a lot of retro games do really well is the concept of easy to pick up and play, but difficult to master. Most retro games, even though they can get pretty difficult in the later stages, most of them are pretty easy on you in the first stage, so you at least have some time to get your bearings. And sure, there are some games that won't be afraid to whoop your sorry butt right from the get-go, but for the most part, you have time to kind of feel your way out in those early stages of the game. The controls are typically pretty straightforward, and it's just a matter of using that basic tool set you have of moves and abilities that the game gives you to progress through the game as the difficulty level gradually ramps up. I think that this is genius game design because that love and appreciation you develop for the game early on makes it so that when you run into those tougher challenges that come later in the game, you care enough and you're invested enough that it actually means something to you to want to get past those challenges. Speaking of which, beating some of these retro games is actually an accomplishment, at least in terms of are you good at the game or not. Think about this. If somebody says, yeah, I beat Red Dead Redemption 2, you don't go, oh my goodness, you must be really good at that game. No, your reaction is, oh my goodness, you had 60 hours to put into that game? And they go, yeah, and 40 of those hours was just riding my horse around. What retro games also have going for them is game selection in terms of having a lot of games from some of your favorite developers. Now, what do I mean by this? Okay, so most modern AAA big budget high cost games, they take forever to make, but retro games didn't take as long. So some of your favorite game developers, for example, Konami and Capcom, they cranked out tons of games back in the day. And so you'd have a ton of games from some of your favorite developers, which is awesome. And because these developers had time to make more games, they would make a larger variety of different games. For example, Capcom on the Super Nintendo, they made all sorts of different cool stuff. Whereas nowadays, they're like, we got time to make Resident Evil, Monster Hunter, Street Fighter, and that's about it. We don't really have time for anything else. For example, one of my favorite Super Nintendo Capcom games is Goof Troop. Now, do you think Capcom would screw around with a game like Goof Troop these days? Heck no. Which, by the way, hot diggity, Goof Troop is a great co-op game, so there's a recommendation for you. Okay, so the big elephant in the room when it comes to comparing retro games to modern games is the visuals. Now, there are some people who will say that 2D sprite work is bad graphics. If somebody ever says that to you, Ooh, I like to pretend those people don't even exist. Beautiful hand-drawn 2D sprite work. A lot of people love this stuff, especially retro gamers, and it's something that for modern games, the only way we really get it is with indie games, bless them. But yeah, for those big budget AAA games, they've kind of just forgotten about 2D sprite work altogether. But anyways, as far as preferences go, if you prefer 2D pixel art over games that try to look more realistic, then yeah, retro games are going to be your jam. And sure, there are some modern games that implement some pretty unique visual techniques that aren't pixel art or photorealism, but my point is, if you want pixel art, then yeah, retro games are going to be your thing. Another thing that retro games have going for them is that they are complete. They're not like modern games where you gotta worry about potential update patches you need to download down the line, that maybe they're on servers and at some point those updates will be removed from the servers and then you'll be left with a game that doesn't play right. No, none of that garbage. The game is just on the cartridge or on the disc or whatever format it is for retro games, and you know the game is complete. It comes with everything it needs. There's no DLC or microtransactions you gotta worry about that have been intentionally separated from the game. No, with retro games, everything that comes with the game, it's all just built into the base game and there for you. Just as an example, let's take a look at Super Mario World. Now, specifically the Star World in that game, which was an extra area you could reach by kind of finding some secrets in the game. Now let's say that was separated from the game and was something you had to purchase extra, and it's on some server that has long been since shut down, so if you don't still have the console that it was downloaded onto, you wouldn't have it. That sucks. Instead, it's just built into the game. It's on the cartridge. You know it's going to be there, and the way you unlock it is just way more fun than paying money for it. You have to figure out some cool secrets in the game to unlock it. That's way better, and that's why people prefer retro games. This creates a sense of comfort for a lot of retro gamers, knowing that as long as they have that original disc, they have that original cartridge, then they will have the complete game forever. Instead, with modern games, you're always worrying about, oh, are these servers gonna shut down? Is my console gonna break? That sucks. It just put the entire freaking game all on one thing so that we can have it and be confident we'll always have it. The reason why having our games forever is important to us is because a lot of the games we own, we've already had for decades and decades. So yeah, having a game for as long as possible is going to matter. We want to future-proof our games. Also, there's just something about the timeless quality of retro video games that makes them special, and they've already proven their timelessness, otherwise we wouldn't still be playing them all these years later. Alright, and so that about does it for my thoughts. Like I said before, I don't think modern games are completely worthless. I actually do enjoy some of them myself. It's just for me, retro games will always be my favorite because there are just some very clear advantages. But with that said, I would love to hear what it is about retro games that you love in comparison to modern games, and if you want to rag on modern games, I guess nothing's going to stop you from doing that either. So whatever your thoughts are, be sure to leave them down below in the comments, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games. He's